Okay, so today we're meeting under strange circumstances. 2 years ago, none of us would have imagined that if we were meeting at an international conference at such a wonderful university, that we would be meeting on Zoom, which I never even heard of 2 years ago. Perhaps you did hear of it, but I did not. What I think that the focus today for us is dealing with the uncertainty, and how do we describe that uncertainty in our writing. Now, there are many experiences that we've had. I apologize, I'm a little nervous. Our focus is on trying to be a little bit more accurate, to move from the poetry of absolute certainty to the more nuanced communication that comes from possibility and probability. And our students know this intuitively. Many of our students are better in math with the precise numbers and the clarity that provides than they are with the ambiguous meanings of words. We're going to be looking today at how widespread general statements are. We're going to talk about some of the beauty of it, and we see advertising in different disciplines. Then we're going to talk about some of the hidden dangers. And then what I want to introduce are some simple classroom techniques. Whether we're working in a high school or a community college, or with graduate students, university students, graduate students, topics that are comfortable and accessible, that will allow us to hit on the 4 C's that were mentioned earlier, and where we can focus on communication skills, critical thinking, collaboration, and creativity. And then we're going to take a look at hedging and boosting language. We're going to talk about, look at some applications in academic writing, why it's so absolutely crucial, and the underestimated power of understatement and clarity. Then we're going to take a look at some business advice that we see. We'll talk about that. And then we'll go over a few classroom assignments, and I'll hint at what I see as some broader implications that we might find. Then we will, Richard will descend into some details and look at some more advanced, difficult techniques, but all within reach of dedicated students and focused educators. And he'll be focusing on stylistic choices. And we're hoping that all of these activities and suggestions will give everyone a gentle nudge toward more responsible and more effective communication. And let me, I apologize. Okay. So let's take a look at advertising. Advertising is all around us. We live in a material world. We live in, many of us live in very commercial cultures. In the United States and in many parts, I think we see ads on our screens. We see billboards on our streets. We find ads on our TVs and on our radio. Some of the times advertising works on the idea of how do we motivate people to take a very concrete action. We're familiar with the slogans, just do it, from Nike. We're not told what the it is, but we're invited to put in our own it. It's an extraordinarily successful campaign. Subway builds on the same idea. We take an authentic desire to eat fresh, healthy food, and then we're given a particular answer. Go to Subway. All of us are interested in a legacy and what is our impact on people immediately around us. And De Beers takes that natural desire to have a positive impact on the world and gives us a commercial solution. Diamonds are forever, a claim there. And then I appreciate the European beer, Carlsberg, and their advertising, kind of mocking the fact that they have a um, sophisticated consumers, and they kind of invite us to wink and a nod and say, hey, look, it's probably the best beer in the world. And that was a very nice campaign. But of course, it's not just in commercials that we find false certainty and surplus confidence. Former President Trump was a very successful businessman, and he spoke in the language of sales and business, and he would often use a wide range of superlatives, the greatest, or if he didn't like something, the worst. We hear tremendous, extraordinary, and lots of very strong absolute claims. We will, we must. It was not unusual for critics to attack his language as lacking subtlety, and sometimes that it could sound very bombastic. Former President Obama, trained as a lawyer, not trained as a businessman, spoke in a different rhetorical kind of discourse. It was more legalistic. He'd been an academic. He worked at the University of Chicago Law School. His statements were much more tentative, more hedged, more cautious. And he would say it is likely, it is probable, it seems possible. And even when delivering harsh messages, he would use language like consequences. There will be consequences for mistakes. Consequences, but not, it's left to our imagination. It's an understatement. In the United States, sometimes this was seen as too polite, too formal, too vague. And what I saw as strong and clear and honest communication didn't always play out that way. Let's take we all know that accuracy is a crucial value in our academic writing. One of the things that I think many of us use is we use charts, graphs, infographics in our presentations, in our classrooms. Our students include them in the research papers. And I like telling, if there are many positive stories to tell. One of them, obviously, the tremendous increase in literacy rates and the ability to read and write in the last 200 plus years. And we can all think of crucial events. But it's worth noting that in just 1950, when many countries had just recently gained their independence, just over half the world was able to read and write. And these are adults. And that we've done a tremendous job in the last 70 years in spreading the ability to read, and not only read and write, but write and share insights. But when students look at graphs, tables, charts, they sometimes do make good mistakes.
Professor Eric, sorry to interrupt,
yes.
But can you please put your slides on slideshow?
Oh, they're not on slide?
Yeah.
Oh boy, why am I not seeing this? Okay, I am so sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
You can just, Eric, click on that button next to the minus sign, like the zoom out sign, and it will start.
Is
yes,
now
perfect,
there?
perfect.
I am so sorry. Okay, so thank you for your indulgence and patience, and I will share the full slides and also post some things on some handouts that can be used in classes. So let us take a look at this chart. Many times students will confuse the certainty. We know what happened in the past. We don't always know why it happened. So when we're describing the past, it is natural for us to use strong, clear language. What we want to focus on our presentation today is why we want to use hedging language for when we are unclear and we are uncertain. As educators, whether it's in high schools or community colleges or vocational institutions or business colleges or research universities, we have the same challenge. We want to teach the hedging language because we want to be able to help our students distinguish certainty from possibility. And we know there are dangers with both surplus confidence, as I just indicated, and I apologize, and also surplus pessimism. We want an accurate, clear snapshot of a changing world where we have incomplete information and we're trying to make sense of it the best we can. I ask, what examples do you use to teach this vital skill? And how often do your students make vague generalizations? And we spent a lot of time in the last few years struggling with the difficulties of not only trying to reduce conflicts in the world, but reduce the silly prevalence of racism and the ugly intolerance that we often face. So there are dangers to vague generalizations and sloppy thinking. So we want to help our students be more clear and more precise. And we know that just like with those advertisements we saw, or unfortunately didn't see, but the difficulties of advertising just thrives on false certainty and telling people, do this and it will solve your problem. Whatever the problem is, just do it and buy some Nike clothes. If you want to be healthy, go eat at Subway. If you're interested in having a legacy, buy a diamond ring, because diamonds are supposedly forever. So we want to gently, clearly introduce this general concept. And many of us, if we were trained in engineering, we're problem solvers. We know how to do this, but applying it in clear language is much more difficult. Let's take a look at some simple ways to introduce it to our students. First, take a step back. Many times, hedging, and we see here some hedges on the side. Hedging is giving an ambiguous answer, and sometimes it's for politeness. Sometimes it's because we don't have sufficient information. Sometimes it's to stall, and sometimes it's to be more clear and more accurate. Critics will often claim it's a weasel word, that lawyers are always talking about might, could, perhaps, seems to, appears to, probably. That's understandable. We're going to suggest that hedging language is often underappreciated, and so is the skeptical tradition. So how do we hedge? One thing that we want to do often with our undergraduates is have them go from making vague, beautiful generalizations to concrete, clear examples. And we want to make sure that that's possible. So let's take a look at a few things. First, before we go to hedging, we did title this Hedging and Boosting. And boosting is what we see in all those ads that bombard us. The greatest, lots of superlatives, usually in the present and eternal sense, present and to kind of convey that it's forever true. We see it in a lot of slang in California, totally awesome. But sometimes this kind of extravagant boosting language is totally inappropriate. Sometimes we could even say that if we're using the language of the salesman and we're using it in diplomacy, we might find it utterly flawed from conception to execution. Let's take a look. So quick review, why do we focus on hedging language so much? We're moving from poetry to accuracy. We're improving writing skills and the ability to describe what is right in front of us. We're trying to demonstrate some critical thinking, and I like to use things from everyday life. Someone can write a food review, a restaurant review, and they can then share that on Yelp. That's nice. If they can go from the greatest restaurant ever, I love the food, to it's my favorite restaurant, that's a more cautious statement. I would count that as success. And then finally, in our academic research, we want to be confidently uncertain, in the classic words of Swales and Feek from the University of Michigan. How do you introduce hedging and boosting language? A million ways, a million ways. Sometimes I bring in newspapers and just share headlines. Ask students to find 10 headlines, and then we'll rewrite the headlines. Sometimes I'll take proverbs, and proverbs are wonderful cultural truths. But many times we know that we have dueling proverbs, and so that's very, very useful. Are my slides moving on your end?
Yes, Eric.
Okay, great. I just wanted to double check. I apologize. We're going to take, we've talked about advertisements. My counter to this is often using, and I know it seems a little casual, but it is accessible and it's comfortable, and it's the lived experiences of many students. So I like using consumer reviews, restaurant reviews, movie reviews, product reviews, and often this language will show app reviews, will show up on standardized tests. And then finally, sometimes we'll spend a lot of time on how to write commentaries for graphs, tables, maps, charts. Well, we have to clearly distinguish there between what has happened and then our speculation about why it happened and what trends it may indicate and the reasons for those trends. I spend a lot of time working on trying to help students move from those vague generalizations in the first papers, often reaction papers, very casual work, to their final research papers, step by step. And I believe that we need to give our students many, many, many opportunities to practice these developing skills. The good news is they love doing it. And on Zoom, they can work in breakout rooms and share their insights easily. Let me give an example on a proverb that I often use. In a very common proverb is "Father knows best." And I ask students, can we make this a little bit more accurate, a little bit more precise? How do we do this? Sometimes we add frequency adverbs. Fathers often know best, usually know best. Sometimes I'll have a student say, "Father never knows best." But I invite them to add a frequency adverb. Sometimes I ask them to add conditions. Father knows best about his schedule. He knows best about his car. He knows best about a particular area of knowledge. This can be a lot of fun. And then I ask them to revise and make other statements. We need to add those qualifiers. And one of the frustrations I sometimes have is that students will look and they'll say, oh, well, where did we get those, Claire? I was told that we shouldn't use hedging. It makes me look weak. It makes me look uncertain. And I blame part of this on Grammarly, and we'll go back to that. But this is a common feedback from students, and Grammarly does give some, I think, ambiguous and slightly misunderstood and misleading sometimes advice. We'll talk about that in a second. It really, hedging is crucial for us for accuracy. We need it in academic and scientific writing. It establishes the stance. It allows our students to move beyond the superficial. It develops their problem-solving skills. And again, embracing the language of possibility and probability, but not certainty. Tomorrow is unknown. And it is a profound mistake to think that everything is set in stone, or that people have fixed abilities. We need to have a sense of we are growing. We're not stones, we're people. We're evolving, we're growing, we're developing, we're learning. So how do I do it? Again, I like consumer reviews. Many of my students love buying things. Consumer culture is all around us. So one thing we might do is a product review. And I mean a particular product. I don't care if it's a water bottle, and I let students obviously choose their topic, a rice cooker, a stapler, a smartphone, earpods, a speaker, doesn't matter to me, hoodie. We ask a few simple questions. What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? Who's the target audience? Can we add some numbers? I know you love it. I understand your passion. I get it. But can we give a little bit of quantitative information? And as we nudge our students toward that, they may go to Amazon and find all kinds of detailed comparison charts. They will slowly, incrementally improve their descriptions of the product and the object. We ask them to compare it in terms of price. I ask them to give me 5 details. They choose the details. Price is always one of them. It's also a chance for us as English teachers to review comparatives and superlatives. Sometimes we can review adjective word order too. But I like focusing on the comparative superlative because it reminds us the difference between it's the best choice and it's one of the best choices. It's good versus this is better than that versus the best of the 3 choices or the 5 choices. So a little bit of attention to the grammar will allow them to deploy effectively the hedging language. So they're improving their descriptions so they can be more persuasive in their recommendations. Is that, can we go on? All right. 3 Idiots, wonderful movie. And every year when every semester when students choose movies to review, the great Indian comedy 3 Idiots is chosen. During COVID, this was one of the most downloaded movies, and that first awful month of March 2020, when we all had so much anxiety and uncertainty in the United States, on Netflix, the #1 film that was on Netflix was 3 Idiots. And I think the message of all is well really hit a lot of people. But when I ask students to do their movie reviews, I ask them to combine both their opinions and facts and to use some hedging language if possible. Even if it's very, very, very positive, 5 stars, their favorite movie. And as they integrate both objective and subjective information, both objective information and subjective experiences. They're able to integrate and create very powerful persuasive reviews. So hedging and modifying just a little bit. The greatest movie ever, or a great comedy, and then finally, obviously, a very satisfying college comedy. Maybe we'll mention 164 film awards, many facts we can bring in to show what a wonderful film this is. I mentioned Grammarly before, and it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. It's something that annoys me. I recommend on day 2 that students who are working in their second, third, fourth best language and writing in their second, third, fourth best language, that they certainly take advantage of Grammarly like many native speakers do. But when I do that, I'm also cognizant that it's not like any software. It has its weaker sides, and sometimes a good idea can be taken too far. I think Grammarly unintentionally does that. But why does Grammarly do it? What is it they do? They say, well, replace I think. I hear you. They say, I think we should set up a meeting is too tentative. Just be strong, be confident. Let's set up a meeting. They say the same thing with I feel. It would be great if, should we be able to, basically. And they offer for the ambitious young entrepreneur, for the young professional, for the working business person to reconsider some of this language and hedging. I'm not sure. I think it often overlooks a few details. I think sometimes it makes us too strong. By being too strong, it can be rude, it can be inaccurate, it can be unprofessional, and sometimes it's just too direct. Sometimes I'm in no position, if I'm talking to my boss, to tell him we will meet next Monday at 5. That's not my call. That's his call. I can suggest. I can't make that decision. So I think there's a little bit of, they take an insight, they go too far, and unfortunately, students often rely on Grammarly a little, perhaps too much. So this is the advice from Grammarly. They acknowledge that sometimes it's useful for politeness. They recognize its social value and indicating softening criticism, but they feel like it makes us look uncertain and unconfident. I argue just the opposite. I think by being honest about what we don't know and about the level of uncertainty, that we can be more candid and be more accurate and more effective. It's also easier to defend our tentative conclusions. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Richard, and Richard's going to descend into some of the a wide range of applications that we can use and more sophisticated techniques beyond just adding frequency adverbs and conditions and avoiding the extreme superlatives. Richard?
Yes, thank you very much, Eric. And let me just, if I could be co-host here, and I'll share my screen then. If I think that might probably be the easiest way to do it. Okay. Okay, share. And then share. Slideshow. Okay, just a test here. Are you seeing the slides move?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay, great, thanks. I'm ready to roll then, I guess. I'd like to pick up and with what the really important things that Eric was saying about email and kind of transition into academic writing from there, is that when Eric and I teach some email workshops sometimes, and we both in our classes talk a lot about email, as he mentioned, and that one of the things I've discovered is that really people are obviously very concerned about grammar, and so we're looking at Grammarly, but pragmatics can be more important in some cases, and especially when you're dealing with sensitive topics. If you are giving good news and you make a grammar mistake, people aren't going to really hold that grammar mistake against you. But if you're giving bad news and you're too direct about complaining, you're not hedging your complaints, that's much more, that will have much more of an effect on your reader, being very direct in your complaints, being aggressive in your suggestions, than minor grammatical mistakes. And in that case, they might take notice of both, and really it has a little bit of a snowball effect. They get upset when they read these emails sometimes with pragmatic mistakes. And so this hedging, I second what he said about the Grammarly. If you're dealing with sensitive topics, you really do need to think about, you know, what in language teaching we talk about pragmatics, and what we're talking about here, just the hedging and the ways to approach that. Now, in academics, as I said in my brief introduction earlier, a lot of what pragmatics are is how close and how certain you are about a statement. And I think this is a good way to just kind of introduce it here. So has anybody here had the unmitigated joy, which is not a hedge statement, of taking the TOEFL? Have people, some people have taken IELTS, some people have taken TOEFL. Has anybody taken the TOEFL? Okay. And so here we have a few statements that are correct and a few statements that are incorrect. And this would be a reading question on a TOEFL here. And because I kind of know the way the TOEFL works, understand that I don't need to read the passage to probably guess the correct or incorrect statement here. There are two correct statements and two incorrect statements here. The author states that, and we have B, C, D, and E. If anybody wants to chime in and say what you think an incorrect statement is, feel free to. I'll give that in a minute here. Can anybody tell me which one might be an incorrect answer here?
Yeah, we can get the responses in the chat box, maybe.
Yeah, the responses are, the author states that B, C, D, E, are these, two of these are correct and two of these are incorrect, even though you don't have the information. Does anybody have any guess on what a TOEFL, which one might be correct and which one might be incorrect?
There are some guesses here, E, B.
Yeah, guesses, anybody, just throw it out there.
They're in the chat box.
They're in the chat box. Okay. Let me
C,
see here.
D. Yeah, C, D. I can read out.
C and D. Okay. C and D are correct. You guys are. You got it. This is excellent. Yes. These blanket statements, always and never. It's the one thing that people teach in the coaching classes about taking standardized tests. Don't choose absolute statements. They're usually wrong. They're usually a trick. And this goes for writing. When I teach my writing classes, I often spend a lot more time on teaching the introduction and the conclusion of papers than I do the middle sections. There's a lot more, especially in the harder sciences, there's a lot more boilerplate language. There's a lot more of the same language in analysis sections. where the beginning and ending, you have to explain how much you believe in your idea, how certain you are about your thesis, how much you agree with what other researchers have said. These are all very important things to say. And I've gotten comments back from editors that say, are you certain of this? How close are you to this research? People haven't been able to tell how certain they are about their results or how close their results are to the results of other people's research. And so I spend a lot more time talking about the discussion sections, how to conclude, and in the opening sections, how to frame, rather than the analysis of what the people are doing, because it's not totally straightforward, but it's much more straightforward. Sometimes I say I'm teaching a sandwich, and the bread is very thick on the ends, and then the middle part I think is a little bit easier. We want to deal with the top and the bottom a little bit more, because we rarely see the absolutes of true and false, or always and never, in academic discussion. We do sometimes, but it's much more common that something is highly probable. Okay, reporting verbs. A good way to start boosting and hedging is talking about reporting verbs. People say we use write, which is a very neutral verb, but write and argue or write and suggest mean very different things. And so thinking about, there are reasons why they sell all these books, 500 English verbs, 500 French verbs or something. Verbs are really the illustrative sections of the sentence. You can add extra illustration with adverbs and adjectives, but if you use a good verb, you don't have to do that extra illustration. That verb is telling you what you need to do. So propose, indicate, use. These will show how strongly you believe in a statement without having to give extra descriptions. This is from Swales and Feek, who Eric mentioned earlier. This is high frequency verbs in harder sciences. We have describe, find, report, show, suggest, develop, report, study. Notice the ones that I'm always having students work on. My students come in and they say wrote and said. That's what I see the most in papers, is wrote and said. And hopefully by the end of the term, they're discussing, they're reporting, they're describing, they're expanding, they're arguing, all of these other ones here. And so this is really a good way to show where you stand and what is going on. Objective versus evaluative verbs. Now, however you use a verb, it cannot be 100%. This is always objective or evaluative. But for example, describe is pretty objective at the top, where recommend, that's evaluating something here. And so here are well, they say objective, I'm arguing with that. Claim is evaluative, so if somebody's claiming something. Contend, we're arguing it. Speculate, that's a nice word for guess here. Mention, they give a star for. Mention is often a little bit of a weaker way, but if you're using it in terms of note, it should be noted, it should be mentioned, then you're actually adding strength to something because you're giving it that should, that mobile verb, it should be mentioned there. 5 common ways to hedge. Frequency adverbs, often, sometimes, usually. Verbs, seem to, appear to, tend to. Conditions, where, when, it's about something, it is in a place, in a car. Citing sources, somebody else says this. Other people have said this. which can also is a very effective way of boosting too. Numbers, percentages. How many people believe this? Now, here's something that I have discovered when I edit, that most writers are very effective in using modal verbs. They can use could, should, might, and may very well. And what I see in discussion sections of papers is it could, it might, it may, it could, it might, it may, it could, it might, it may. Often the language is not varied, and there are many other really beautiful ways and good ways to hedge. And so could, might, may, they're very good. But there's a lot beyond that. And that's what I try to talk about here. So ly adverbs, one of the things we see the most in English writing is highly. I'm confident, I'm highly confident. It is likely, it is highly likely. That's still a hedge. It's not a 100%, but we're trying to say that we're very confident about that. Most people do not give the absolute. They give highly likely, highly confident. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, the may, might, could gets quite repetitive. And so mixing these up with the other adverbs here. Here's some introductory phrases and words. It is important to, it may be practical to, it is vital to, it is not possible to. These it plus to structures can really effectively hedge a sentence. There is a chance that, it is doubtful that, there should be no doubt. There and that are also very effective ways to hedge sentences here. So I use a cooking analogy in my classes when I talk about this. I say we add either sweet or spicy or strong or weaker tastes with the ly adverbs here. May slightly, would clearly, should gradually. These combinations are what make an effective discussion section and an effective introduction where we really know how the writer feels about what they're talking about. This is the one I do in class here. I just say, coffee improves job performance. That's an unhedged sentence. One of the strongest non-hedged sentences you can say is the simple present tense. In English, the simple present tense states an absolute truth here. We could say coffee slightly improves job performance, or we could say coffee might improve job performance. However, if we mix these up, coffee should definitely improve your job performance. Coffee might overwhelmingly improve job performance. If you're a real coffee fan, that's your go-to sentence there. So this is a good example in that we can show how far we are on our 0 to 100%, and we can use these modals and these LYs to move our thoughts anywhere from 0 to 100. I like, in my classes, I talk about how it's kind of a quirk of American culture that we have a lot of advertisements for medicine on TV, and they have these words aggravate and alleviate. And these are great ones. May slightly aggravate something, may immediately alleviate your headache. And so these are words I use, and I have students work with them in class. And here are these. Here, this last one, it is entirely unlikely, we're doubling the hedge there. highly possible, boosting followed by hedging. Certainly possible, boosting followed by hedging. And so I'm going to move forward here a little bit. And so basically, the world is full of problems. There are local problems, there are global problems, and how do we discuss problems? One kind of the defining aspect of a problem is nobody's certain about it. There isn't a certainty about it. And so, but how strongly do we feel about our solution to the problem? How strongly do we feel that this is the most important problem that needs to be solved? This is where hedging and boosting language is extremely important. And this is what I spend a lot of time on when I'm editing papers, not only when I'm teaching class. I work with author, I say, how strongly do you feel about this? Is it an absolute? And we work with it, and by the time it's done, ideally, people know where you stand. And you stand confidently, but you're not overconfident. You're not stepping over boundaries that say things that you really, don't have the belief on or don't have the confidence on. And so, Eric, that's my closing statement. Eric, would you like to jump back for a closing statement here?
Sure. I guess I would just say that we've seen in the last 16 months that we have that we live in uncertain times. There are a lot of uncertainties. And I hope that if we teach more critical thinking in our classes, not only can our students more accurately describe their research and their thoughts, but also we hope outside to lead to more responsible communication. And if we dare, hope for even a more rational world where we have better lives and more understanding of the world, just by avoiding that surplus confidence and avoiding, on the other hand, these surplus pessimism. Let's just hear, 2 cheers for realism and for accuracy and balance. So can we answer any questions? And I apologize again for my terrible.
We had some questions and yeah.
Thank you very much. I would request the participants to raise questions in the QA if they have any.
Great.
Okay. I'm gonna stop sharing here. Maybe the chat box will be a little more visible then for all of us here.
Yeah, even the chat box will do.
Yeah.
Questions?
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Meanwhile, can I ask a question?
Please.
Yeah.
Sure.
Where, like, how do we, especially, when we are teaching technical writing, and when we talk about clarity as part of, as one of the important aspects of technical writing. So how would hedging and boosting affect the clarity part of technical writing? If you can just throw some light on it.
Yeah. Well, one thing is asking them to return to numbers, because numbers do add precision and clarity. And then often students need help in just explaining to us the process and giving some of those clarifications, not exaggerating the trends. That's the big good mistake that I see students do, as they're kind of overly confident in the presentation and the description of the trends. The other thing is calling them back to definitions. Richard mentioned the importance of verbs, absolutely, and how do we know what we know, and calling upon them to cite their sources. And then as far as the difficulty of giving a clear description. So sometimes we have this problem of it's not going to be one adjective is enough. We're going to need compound adjectives, and just reminding them that we're going from subjective to objective in our adjective word order after we give the numbers. So, you know, that's part of that being clear, is making sure you give us those messy details. And definitions, please. Because sometimes they'll use acronyms and it's like, you know that acronym, but PSR has many, many different meanings. And don't assume that I know your jargon or I know your acronym. So please make sure you give us the background on it. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. Well, there are a couple of questions I'll read out maybe from QA. Can using qualifications help in hedging our language? For example, if we said drinking coffee performs job performance in my experience, would I be hedging my claim by adding in my experience? This is a question by Trinity Bastria. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's that kind of condition of under what conditions does it happen? And so obviously adding a condition, not talking about the grammatic conditional, but under what conditions something is true is one of the most common ways to hedge. And that's one that, going back to the email, it's a common one in emails, like, you know, we're talking about times, what times are possible and things like that, rather than saying we absolutely have to meet at this time. Under what conditions can we meet? Very, very common way to hedge.
Right, thank you. There's another question by Dr. Leena Zadav. How can we help our students improve their academic writing?
Improve academic writing.
Yeah.
And specifically in terms, Eric, do you want to?
Well, I was just going to say, I think hedging language is the foundation. Is the hedging language is really crucial, and Richard's suggestion of using both an LY and a modal is very, very effective. Just those two will be a huge upgrade. Adding transitions is often helpful too. But that, you know, that I would just focus on those. And hedging language is absolutely crucial in technical reports. I mean, the Richard Feynman's work on the Challenger disaster basically came down to poor communication within NASA. And part of it was a culture of not wanting to challenge people in authority, even when they thought the calculations were wrong. So people were faxing the calculations that showed there was a huge problem, but there was no cover sheet explaining what the calculations were. So you had all these numbers and people were like, what are these numbers referencing to? It didn't make sense because there was no frame, there was no context, and all those wonderful calculations were disregarded. Tragedy ensued. So for technical writing, we do need the frame, but we certainly need the technical writing requires accuracy, and that often means hedging language.
Thank you. There's one more question by Soumitra Sarkar. In Indian context, students of secondary level coin new words like children's, women's, could with K. Can this be taken as hedging? Please clarify.
Richard, you want to take that one?
What, coining new words?
Yeah, coining words, like children's, actually, women's and all that.
Well, the one I see often is knowledge it, and I'm conservative on this. I think that while there's a wonderful delight in creativity, and language is evolving and changing, and we need to be aware of new and evolving definitions, we also need to think about who's the audience, what's the context, what's the purpose. So what is the purpose of this new word? Slang often communicates a new phenomenal. Like I'm very fond of the slang term lifequake. It's not an earthquake, it's a lifequake. And COVID was a lifequake for us. Having said that, I would never use lifequake in an academic context. I would not use it in a formal setting, and it's a disaster on any kind of assessment that's done by any kind of standardized exam. So it's not that we're conformist, but we do have to conform to expectations. And I would advise in a nonfiction class to stick to the conventional or at least contested words and not limit our creativity a little bit. We're very creative, but we don't have to show it all the time. Is that helpful?
Guess so. Yeah. Well, there's one more question. Vijay Sathe. In writing research papers, is hedging language advisable?
I would not hedge on this. I would say it's not. It's more than advisable. It is absolutely necessary. I'm going to go all the way to like 100% on that one. So here's one of my other hobby horse phrases, which Eric has heard a lot. And it goes back to the question earlier about how can you improve academic writing? And my absolute best advice is imitation is golden, plagiarism is illegal, or plagiarism is bad. That means read good papers, find good sentences, think about how the writers wrote those sentences and imitate them. You don't plagiarize them, you look at what words they're using and you make your own sentences that are similar to those. The great writers throughout history have learned to write that way. I discover when I am not even teaching, when I'm editing, I will, if I have somebody I've edited with a lot, I'll be working and changing their language because they're working in a second language. And I'll sometimes see my language coming back at me 3 or 4 papers later that they've kind of learned. They've seen that I've been using this type of language and they've started to imitate my writing a little bit. And now I'm not saying I am the world's greatest writer and I need to be imitated, but you see this, a good example is the technical writing in those middle sections that are very, what we call boilerplate. You start to recognize certain sentences and the way these sentences are constructed. And I can write this. I've got these sentences. I'm very comfortable with writing those. It's a little harder in your introductions and discussions. And that's what we were giving advice on today. Look at those ways that people are mixing up the hedging and boosting. Say, I'm going to write a sentence like that. I have a book full of sentences I've written down from other things that I think are great sentences. And, I look at them and I say, okay, maybe this is the type of sentence I want to use sometime. Not the sentence, the type of sentence.
Thank you. Well, Ishita Gargil is asking, would usage of hedging in academic writing affect the outcome of the paper or presentation?
Often. Yeah. Thank you. If it was possible to make me a co-host again, I would be glad to share our PowerPoint, which includes some references that I think people will find interesting too, and some handouts.
You are the co-host. You can share if you wish.
How do I do? I'm having trouble uploading. Okay, I will try again. All right, thank you. I apologize. Today's not been a great day for technical matters. I apologize. Are there any other questions we can answer? We've enjoyed talking to you for a decent amount of time, and we're excessively generous in those introductions. Thank you.
Just a minute, I'll look for some more questions. There are some more questions. Dipali Thorat is asking, is hedging only a strategy?
Richard?
Is only a, well, yes, you could say it's a strategy. It's not, maybe not only a strategy,
Not
it's
only
a
a
good
strategy.
strategy. Yeah, it's a very good strategy. And there are, I would say there are many strategies within hedging. There are positioning yourself, how close you are to another person's idea. There are the strategies of verb use, reporting verbs, which isn't what people might call the modal verbs, which are your classic hedges. So yes, it's a strategy. And going back to, I think there was a question earlier about the outcome of the paper. I think I mentioned it earlier. I've had editors say that, you are too confident in these results. You're overstating this, or you're overgeneralizing it, which is weaker. And all of these can be done with simply boosts and hedges and things like that when you're rewriting.
And let me kind of build on that. I don't think it's just a strategy at all. I mean, I think that there are so many times, in the United States, from my point of view, and many disagree, obviously, but from my point of view, we have seen how powerful, not only in advertising, but in, let's say, public policy issues, that false certainty can be. And it can be a very effective emotional appeal. And sometimes reason doesn't win the game. And sometimes you sit here and you say, we've got these facts, da 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 da, and the facts don't seem to echo as loudly or as with large. So from my point of view, this is not just a matter of strategic or professional development. I actually think I don't want to overstate it, but I do think there's a moral component to trying to reduce the irrationality, let's say, of purely emotional absolute appeals. It's too easy for things to be divided into angels and demons. And it's not true. We are flawed human beings, and pretending that some people are angels and some people are demons, it's just not good if we're trying to have a democratic, peaceful, enlightened society. It causes trouble from my point of view.
Right. Well, there are many more questions, but then we have time constraint.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I if you could share my technological incompetence was too evident today. And if you could share our PowerPoint and our handouts, that would be great.
Sure. We shall do that. Yeah. Well, thank you, Professor Richard, for sharing those wonderful ideas and concepts. And with this, we come to the conclusion of this inaugural session. And I request all the participants to join us for the next plenary session on challenges and potential, developing curriculum for changing times by Dr. Meena Lochana Inguva. We will be starting the session at 10:40. So please join by clicking the link on the program schedule, sharp at 10:40. Thank you, everyone. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mm-hmm.